Okay, cell theory has actually a couple different things. This is one paper, 2 journal entries. Prokaryote versus eukaryote is one. Cell theory and cell endosymbiosis theory is another. And you have these papers. So now, if you have this version of the paper, this is the old version, this is the new version, it's pretty much almost the same thing. So don't freak out about the differences. Whatever is different, you can ignore. Like those little pieces of papers, you can just throw them in the trash. It's essentially the same thing. Okay, here we go. Cell theory and prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. Cut off all the dotted lines. So cut dotted lines. You're going to end up with these pieces of paper. Those are going to be for cell theory and symbiosis. These papers, the littler papers, those are for prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. With this, all living things are made of 1 or more cells. Just a little bit of glue. 3 parts to the cell theory. Part number 1, all living things are made of 1 or more cells. So we have some of our 1-cell organisms. Okay. Single cellular, unicellular, single-celled organisms, amoebas, paramecium, bacteria. All right, those are all in the category of unicellular. Archaea as well. We've talked about those. These are unicellular type organisms. Multicellular, many cells in one living thing. Every living thing is made of cells. If I were to scratch off a piece of my skin and look at it under a microscope, I would find cells. If I were to scratch off a piece of a plant and look under it, zoom in, look under a microscope, I'd find cells. Everything that's alive is made out of cells. All right? So, if it is alive, it's made of cells. If it is alive, it is made of cells. That's the first part to the cell theory. The second part of the cell theory, okay? This picture, just a little bit of glue. We will be drawing on it, so just a little bit of glue. Not a lot, just drops in the corners. All cells come from other cells. So we have a parent cell, and that cell will divide into 2 daughter cells. We call this dividing process cellular division, in which one cell divides into 2 cells. Cellular division takes one cell, we call it the parent cell, and divides it into 2 daughter cells. Those daughter cells each will divide into their own daughter cells. So this becomes the parent cell and it'll become daughter cells. This daughter cell will become a parent cell and divide into 2 daughter cells. Okay, and this process goes on forever. This is where cells come from. Okay? So a cell can't just magically appear. A cell doesn't come from a bunch of non-organic things and you piece them together and you make a cell. Okay, you can't make cells in a laboratory. Similarly, cells cannot spontaneously create themselves. Okay? So, number 3. Okay, obviously we're writing on this one for the line, so just a dot of glue in each corner, just so it sticks down. Cells are the fundamental unit of structure and function for all living things. Okay, so what this means, cells are the smallest unit of life, which goes back to the all living things are made of cells, or a cell. Okay, so life, let's define what that means. Okay, the functions of life. What do all living things do? All living things use energy. All living things need energy. This is usually we're talking about where they need food. All right? We're talking about metabolism. All living things take in food somehow, some way, process, use that food for energy. Okay? Take in food or make food somehow. Talking about metabolism. All living things reproduce. Okay, so reproduce in one form or another, whether it's asexual or sexual reproduction. We're talking about make babies. Okay, make babies. Either it's a single cell organism that divides itself in half to create two new ones, or we have sexual reproduction or something. All living things grow. It gets bigger. We start off as babies, and then they grow older, and then they get older, and they get older, and they get bigger. Things grow. Living things grow. Non-living things, like a rock. Rock's not alive. Rocks don't get bigger. They don't grow. We don't have baby rocks and mama rocks and daddy rocks, okay? So death. If it's alive, it can die. A rock can't die, all right? Like a rock can't reproduce. It can't make babies, all right? They don't need food. So these are things living things need, do, and act. These are the functions of life. This is what living things do compared to non-living things. Over on this page, we're going to talk about endosymbiosis theory. We're going to write on it, and then we'll glue it in and we'll move on. Okay, so this paper, endosymbiosis theory. So this is kind of explains where eukaryotic cells came from, explaining that they used to be part of prokaryotic cells. This is like evolution, like way, way, way back at the beginning when life began. All right, so the most simple prokaryotic cells were the first life form. The first form of the life. The first thing that could do all of these things that living things do. Okay? The first thing they used energy, reproduced, grew, and could die. Our first living thing were simple prokaryotic cells. Okay? A large cell engulfed a smaller cell with special capabilities. This formed a mutualistic relationship, all right? Symbiosis. This is where the name comes from, the endosymbiotic theory. So we started off with this simple prokaryotic cell, okay? So this simple prokaryotic cell, the first life form, okay? It was the larger cell, and it engulfed a smaller cell. So engulfed, that's this action right here. This cell is taking in, this big cell is taking in this little cell right here. Oops, different color. This little cell right here. This is the smaller cell with special capabilities. Okay? In this case, the special capability was the ability to do aerobic respiration. Okay? Be able to do cellular respiration, basically. And so it went in and it evolved into the mitochondria. Okay? So this little aerobic cell evolved into what we now have, the organelle, the mitochondria. Okay, the mitochondria does the cellular respiration in the cell. That's its function. Okay, it makes ATP. That's what the mitochondrion does. Now, some of these early cells evolved a step further. Okay? And they engulfed another, this time a photosynthetic bacteria. Okay? And these became modern photosynthetic eukaryotes. So we're talking about here, these are talking about plants and some of those protistas, where these are more like animals. Okay, the ones that can do photosynthesis, the ones that cannot do photosynthesis. Okay, but as this bacteria goes in, they were able to work together. They got this symbiotic relationship. They helped each other survive. So this engulfed cell, okay, the engulfed cell became an organelle. The larger cell is now a eukaryotic cell. So the larger cell now becomes eukaryotic because now it has an organelle inside of it. So that's the idea of this idea of endosymbiosis. Okay, the endosymbiotic theory. One cell took in another smaller cell, and that smaller cell that got taken in became an organelle. Now there's all sorts of evidence and fascinating things, and you can totally watch videos that give you so much information on this idea, and it's so cool. But that's all I'm putting in the notes. If you want to understand it better, you really got to watch some video that can kind of animate it and explain and get into more detail. All right. The next page of the notes, prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. All right, this is a compare and contrast. We're doing a T-chart. So first we're going to look at pictures. Prokaryotic, eukaryotic. Right here, you should hopefully recognize these two. Prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. First thing we're going to do is compare these two pictures. Which is eukaryotic, which are prokaryotic? Looking at pictures of cells. So these two cells, are these prokaryotic, eukaryotic? This cell is a prokaryotic, eukaryotic. Well, eukaryotic, prokaryotic. Glue those in, give yourself a line of space above. Okay, when we're talking about eukaryotic cells, we usually, on the test, talking about one of two types. Okay, so these two cells, look at them carefully. What's the difference? This one's an animal cell. This one's a plant cell. This one, now you'll kind of look at it and be like, what am I looking at? The diagram's kind of showing you things that are always present in prokaryotic cells. We've got DNA, ribosome, cell wall, cytoplasm, and cell membrane. Sometimes present you have plasmids, you can have capsule, you can have flagella, all right? You can have cilia. So those are some features that you might see there. This, we're talking about usually like bacteria. All right, so visually, just comparing these two. Eukaryotic cells, lots of organelles. And we describe those organelles as being membrane bound. They like that phrase. What that means is that it just means that the organelles inside there are covered in their own membrane. They each have a membrane. There's no membrane organelles over here, okay? This has organelles with membranes. These organelles, like the ribosome, plasmid, not membranes. All right, so we're talking about like the nucleus. We're talking about the Golgi. We're talking about the mitochondria. In plants, we're talking about the chloroplast. Okay, we're talking about vacuoles. We're talking about, etc. Okay? Those are all organelles. Whereas inside the prokaryotic cell, you're going to find ribosomes. You're going to find plasma membrane. You're going to find cytoplasm, the liquid of the cell. And you're going to find circular DNA. Another important difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic is size. Eukaryotic cells are small. There's no question. They're a cell, okay? You need what's called a light microscope. Okay? You need a light microscope to be able to be able to see them. Okay? They're small. They need to be seen with a microscope. However, prokaryotic cells are very small. Okay, they are smaller than the eukaryotic cells. Okay, you need what's called an electron microscope. To see them. All right. Now that we've talked about size, let's talk about the nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. And the nucleus is important because it contains DNA. All right. The DNA inside eukaryotic cells has a linear structure. It has two ends and it's a long strand. Whereas prokaryotic cells, no nucleus. There's no nucleus inside there, but there's still DNA. All right? The DNA is just in the cytoplasm. The DNA has a circular structure. All right, so let's look at this picture first. Eukaryotic cell. The DNA, linear structured, has ends to it. It's part of a chromosome. The chromosome is found inside the nucleus. The nucleus isn't found inside the cell. Okay, so kind of orients you there, considering the DNA inside the nucleus, inside the cell of a eukaryotic organism, eukaryotic cell. Over here, we're going to draw a prokaryotic cell. Okay, so what we just drew right there, that's the plasma membrane. The liquid is the cytoplasm. Okay, the liquid inside the cell that's just like drawn as empty blank space, the cytoplasm. The DNA has a circular structure, so there's really no beginning, there's no end, it just keeps going in a circle. So that, okay, that's the DNA with its circular structure. All right. Now, our last two little pieces of paper. Archaean bacteria or plants, animal, fungi, and protista. You too. Take care. archaea and bacteria are prokaryotic. Animals, plants, fungi, and protista, eukaryotic. All right, remember those are the kingdoms. Remember, archaea can also be called archaea bacteria. And bacteria can also be known as eubacteria. All right, those are the kingdom names, those are the domain names. These are all the kingdoms within the domain Eukarya. All right. And that is a quick jot of all the notes, comparison and contrast prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells.